In today's story, a man walks into a restaurant and gets thrown out. They called him dirty. They said he didn't belong. They refused to serve him. But when a black limousine pulled up outside and someone stepped out to pick him up, everything changed. This is a story about sacrifice, about family, and about why you should never judge someone's story by a single chapter. Stay until the end. The moment they realize who he really is, it'll break your heart. It was a cold November afternoon in the city. Rain had been falling all morning, turning the streets gray and slick. People hurried past with umbrellas, heads down, focused on getting wherever they needed to go. And sitting on a bench outside a small grocery store was a man. His name was Thomas Bennett. He was 58 years old, but he looked older, tired, worn down by life. He wore a faded jacket that had seen better days. His jeans were patched at the knees. His shoes were held together with duct tape. His hair was messy. His beard was untrimmed. His hands were rough and calloused. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another homeless man trying to get out of the rain. But if you looked closer, you'd see something different. His eyes. They were kind, gentle, and they carried a weight that most people would never understand. Thomas wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, he had a good life. He worked as a mechanic, had a small house in the suburbs, a wife named Claire, and a son. His son's name was Daniel. Daniel was everything to Thomas, his whole world. Smart kid. Funny. Loved baseball. Wanted to be an engineer when he grew up. And then, when Daniel was 12 years old, everything changed. Daniel got sick. Leukemia. The doctors said he needed treatment. Chemotherapy. Bone marrow transplants. Medications that cost more than most people made in a year. Thomas's insurance covered some of it, but not all of it, not even close. So Thomas did what any father would do. He sold the house. He sold the car. He took out loans. He worked 3 jobs. He did everything he could to keep his son alive. And it worked. Daniel survived, but Thomas lost everything in the process. The stress destroyed his marriage. Claire left, took what little savings they had left. Thomas couldn't keep up with the debt, lost his job, lost his apartment, and eventually he ended up on the streets. But he never regretted it, not for a second, because Daniel was alive, and that's all that mattered. Now, 10 years later, Thomas was still struggling. He picked up odd jobs when he could. Day labor, helping people move, anything. He stayed in shelters when there was space, slept on benches when there wasn't, and he survived. But today was different. Today, Thomas had something to look forward to. He checked the old watch on his wrist, a gift from Daniel when he was 8 years old. It barely worked anymore, but Thomas never took it off. 4:47 p.m. He had a little over an hour. He stood up from the bench, adjusted his jacket, and started walking down the street. There was a diner a few blocks away, a place called Rosie's. Thomas had been there once before, years ago, back when things were better. He remembered the food was good, the atmosphere was warm, and today he wanted to treat himself. He'd saved up $23 from odd jobs over the past 2 weeks. Enough for a hot meal. He walked through the rain, hands in his pockets, and headed toward Rosie's Diner. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Rosie's Diner was exactly how Thomas remembered it. Red leather booths, checkered floors, the smell of fresh coffee and grilled burgers. A bell chimed as he pushed open the door. The place was busy. Families eating dinner. Couples sharing desserts. A few solo diners reading newspapers. Thomas stepped inside, dripping wet from the rain. A few people glanced up at him, then quickly looked away. Thomas walked to the counter where a hostess stood. Her name tag read Stephanie. She was young, maybe 22, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, bright smile, until she saw Thomas. Then the smile disappeared. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat. "Table for one, please," Thomas said politely. Stephanie looked him up and down. Her nose wrinkled slightly. We're actually pretty full right now," she said. Thomas glanced around. There were at least 3 empty booths. "It looks like there's space," he said gently. Stephanie's jaw tightened. "Those are reserved." "All of them?" "Yes." Thomas nodded slowly. "Okay, what about the counter? Can I sit there?" Stephanie hesitated. Then she called over her shoulder, "Brad, can you come here for a second?" A man walked over from the kitchen. Brad Lawson, manager, mid-30s, slicked back hair, arms crossed. "What's up?" Brad asked. Stephanie nodded toward Thomas. "He wants to sit at the counter." Brad looked at Thomas. His expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Brad said bluntly. Thomas blinked. "I just want to get something to eat." "This is a family establishment," Brad said. "We have a dress code." Thomas looked down at his clothes. "I know I'm not dressed well, but I have money. I can pay." "That's not the point," Brad said. "You're making our other customers uncomfortable." "I haven't done anything." "You're dripping water all over the floor," Brad interrupted. "You smell like you haven't showered in days. And frankly, you don't belong here." The words cut deep. A few diners nearby had stopped eating and were watching. Thomas felt his face flush. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Just leave," Brad said coldly, "before I call the cops." Thomas stood there for a moment, frozen. Then, quietly, he said, "Okay." He turned and walked toward the door. As he reached it, a woman at one of the booths spoke up. "That's awful," she said to her husband. "He just wanted to eat." Her husband shrugged. "Not our problem." Thomas pushed open the door and stepped back out into the rain. The bell chimed behind him, and he stood there on the sidewalk, feeling the cold seep into his bones. Thomas walked away from the diner, his head down. He felt humiliated, not because he was turned away. He'd been turned away from places before, but because of the way Brad had looked at him, like he was nothing, like he didn't deserve basic human dignity. Thomas found another bench a block away and sat down. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and stared at the rain-soaked street. His stomach growled. He still had the $23 in his pocket, but now he didn't know where to go. And then he heard voices. He looked up. A group of teenagers, maybe 16, 17 years old, were walking down the street. 4 of them, laughing, joking around. One of them noticed Thomas. "Yo, check it out," the kid said, elbowing his friend. "Homeless dude." The others looked over. "Dude, he's soaked," another one said, laughing. They walked closer. Thomas stayed still, hoping they'd just pass by. But they didn't. "Hey, man," one of them said, standing in front of Thomas. "You got any change?" Thomas looked up. "No. Sorry." "Come on, don't lie," the kid said. "I bet you've been panhandling all day." I'm not panhandling, Thomas said quietly. Yeah, right, another kid said. That's what they all say. One of them pulled out his phone and started recording. Yo, this is gonna be hilarious, he said. Stop, Thomas said. Please. But the kid with the phone stepped closer, filming Thomas's face. Say hi to the internet, homeless dude. Thomas stood up. I asked you to stop. What are you gonna do about it? The kid taunted. And then something inside Thomas snapped, not with anger, but with exhaustion. You want to know why I'm homeless? Thomas said, his voice shaking. You want to know what happened to me? The kids went quiet, sensing the shift in his tone. I had a son, Thomas continued. He got cancer, and I spent every dollar I had, everything I owned, to keep him alive. I sold my house, I sold my car, I worked myself into the ground, and I lost everything. The kids exchanged uncomfortable glances. But he's alive, Thomas said, his voice breaking. My son is alive, and I don't regret a single second of it. The kid with the phone lowered it. So go ahead, Thomas said. Make fun of me, post your video, laugh at the homeless guy. But you have no idea what I've been through. No idea what I sacrificed. One of the kids, a girl, looked like she was about to cry. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Thomas sat back down, his hands shaking. The teenager stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then, one by one, they walked away. The kid with the phone stopped the recording and deleted it. They disappeared around the corner. And Thomas sat there alone, staring at the ground. A few minutes later, an older man walked by. He'd overheard the whole thing. He stopped in front of Thomas. Hey, the man said gently. Thomas looked up. The man held out a $20 bill. For whatever you need. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I can't take that. You can, the man said, and you will. You're a good father. Anyone can see that. He placed the money in Thomas's hand, squeezed his shoulder, and walked away. Thomas stared at the $20 bill, his vision blurred with tears. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. And he thought about Daniel, his boy, the reason he was still fighting. Thomas stayed on that bench for another hour. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. He watched people pass by. Some ignored him. Some gave him sympathetic looks. A few dropped coins into the cup he didn't even have. And then he heard something. Crying. He looked to his left. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, was standing a few feet away, tears streaming down her face. She was alone. Thomas stood up slowly and walked over. Hey, he said gently. Are you okay? The little girl looked up at him, her lip trembling. I can't find my mommy. Thomas's heart clenched. What's your name? Emma. Okay, Emma. When did you last see your mommy? I don't know, she sobbed. We were at the store, and I was looking at the toys, and then she was gone. Thomas knelt down to her level. It's okay. We're going to find her. I promise. He looked around. The grocery store was just across the street. Did you come from that store? He asked, pointing. Emma nodded. All right, let's go back there. Your mom is probably looking for you too. He held out his hand. Emma hesitated for a moment, then took it. Together, they walked across the street and into the grocery store. Inside, Thomas could hear someone calling out, "Emma! Emma, where are you?" A woman came running around the corner, mid-30s, panicked, tears in her eyes. "Mommy!" Emma cried. The woman dropped to her knees and pulled Emma into a tight hug, sobbing with relief. "Oh, my God! Oh, my God! I thought I lost you!" she cried. Thomas stood back, watching. The woman looked up and saw him. Did you bring her back?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "She was outside. Said she couldn't find you." The woman stood up, still holding Emma's hand. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done." "She's safe," Thomas said with a small smile. "That's all that matters." The woman looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw past the worn clothes and the messy hair. She saw a kind man, a good man. "Can I give you something?" she asked. "Money? Anything?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't need anything. Just take care of her." The woman's eyes filled with tears again. "You're a good person." Thomas's smile was sad. "I'm just a father. I know what it's like to worry about your child." The woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. She took Emma's hand and walked away, glancing back at Thomas one more time. Thomas left the store and walked back to the bench. He checked his watch. 5:52 p.m., almost time. He stood up, smoothed down his jacket as best he could, and started walking toward the park 3 blocks away. That's where he was supposed to meet Daniel, his son, who he hadn't seen in 6 months. As Thomas walked through the streets, he passed by Rosie's Diner again. He didn't plan to stop, but as he walked by, he heard shouting from inside. He paused and glanced through the window. It was Brad, the manager. He was yelling at one of the waitresses. "I don't care if you're tired," Brad was shouting. "You work until I say you can leave." The waitress, a young woman who looked exhausted, had tears in her eyes. "I've been here for 10 hours, she said. "I just need a break." "Then maybe you should find another job," Brad snapped. A few customers looked uncomfortable. One older man stood up. "Hey, that's enough. You don't talk to people like that." Brad turned to him. "Mind your own business." "She's a person," the man said, "not your servant." Brad's face turned red. "Get out, both of you. Get out of my diner." The older man shook his head in disgust. He put money on the table and left. The waitress ran to the back, crying. Thomas stood outside, watching through the window, and he thought about what Brad had said to him earlier. "You don't belong here." Thomas had been judged, dismissed, treated like he was less than human. And now he was watching Brad do the same thing to someone else. Thomas took a deep breath, and he kept walking. But he made a mental note. If he ever had the chance to help that waitress, he would. Thomas reached the park at 5:58 p.m. There was a fountain in the center, the same fountain where he used to bring Daniel when he was a kid. Thomas sat on the edge of it and waited. His heart was pounding. He hadn't seen Daniel in 6 months. They'd kept in touch, phone calls, texts when Thomas could get to a library with Wi-Fi, but it wasn't the same. Daniel had moved across the country for work. He'd graduated from MIT with a degree in engineering, just like he'd always wanted. He'd landed a job at a tech company. He was doing well, really well. But Thomas had refused to let Daniel support him financially. "You earned that," Thomas had told him. "You build your life. I'll figure mine out." Daniel had argued. pleaded, offered to send money, to get Thomas an apartment, to help. But Thomas was too proud, or maybe too ashamed. He didn't want his son to see him like this, but today, Daniel had insisted. "Dad, I'm coming to see you, and I'm not taking no for an answer." So here Thomas was, waiting. At exactly 6 p.m., Thomas heard the sound of a car pulling up. He turned, and his breath caught. A black limousine. It parked at the edge of the park. The driver stepped out and opened the back door, and Daniel stepped out. But he wasn't the same boy Thomas remembered. He was 22 now, tall, well-dressed in a sharp suit, confident. But his eyes were the same. Daniel saw Thomas and froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel started walking, slowly at first, then faster. And then he was running. "Dad!" Thomas stood up, his vision blurred with tears. Daniel crashed into him, wrapping his arms around him in a fierce hug. "Dad! Oh, my God," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I missed you so much." Thomas held his son tight, tears streaming down his face. "I missed you too, buddy. I missed you too." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other. People in the park stopped and stared. The man in the worn, patched jacket, and the young man in the expensive suit. Father and son. Finally, they pulled back. Daniel looked at his father, taking in the worn clothes, the tired eyes, the weathered face. "Dad, you can't keep living like this," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You can't." "I'm okay." "You're not okay," Daniel interrupted, "and I'm not letting you do this anymore." Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but Daniel held up a hand. "You spent 10 years sacrificing everything for me. You gave up your house, your job, your life. You did that so I could live, so I could have a future." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "And now I have that future. I have a good job. I have money. And I'm not going to stand here and watch you suffer when I can help." Thomas shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything," Daniel said firmly. "You're my father. You saved my life. And now it's my turn to save yours." Thomas broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. Daniel pulled him close again. "It's okay, Dad. It's going to be okay. I promise." After a few minutes, Daniel pulled back and smiled. "Come on, let's get out of here." "Where are we going?" Thomas asked. "Somewhere better," Daniel said. "I have a surprise for you." They walked toward the limousine. The driver opened the door, and they climbed in. As the car pulled away from the park, it drove past Rosie's Diner. Thomas looked out the window, and through the glass he could see Brad and Stephanie standing at the counter, staring at the limousine with wide eyes. They didn't know it was him inside, but they were about to find out. The limousine pulled up in front of Rosie's Diner. Thomas looked at Daniel, confused. "Why are we stopping here?" Daniel smiled. "You'll see." The driver opened the door, and Daniel stepped out. Then he turned and offered his hand to Thomas. Thomas took it and stepped out of the limousine. People on the street stopped and stared. Inside the diner, Brad and Stephanie noticed the commotion. They walked to the window, and they saw Daniel in his sharp suit standing next to Thomas, the homeless man they'd kicked out just a few hours earlier. Brad's face went pale. Daniel walked toward the diner, his arm around his father's shoulders. They pushed open the door. The bell chimed. The entire diner went silent. Daniel walked straight up to the counter where Brad stood. "Hi," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Daniel Bennett. This is my father, Thomas Bennett." Brad swallowed hard. A few hours ago you refused to serve my father," Daniel continued. "You told him he didn't belong here. You told him he was making people uncomfortable." Brad opened his mouth, but no words came out. Daniel continued, "My father is the best man I've ever known. When I was 12, I got cancer, and he spent everything he had to save me. He sold his house, his car. He worked 3 jobs. He lost everything." The diner was completely silent. "And because of him," Daniel said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I'm alive. I graduated from MIT. I work as a lead engineer at a tech company. And I'm successful because he believed in me." Tears were streaming down Daniel's face now. "So when you told him he didn't belong here, you were wrong. He belongs anywhere he wants to be, because he's earned it. He's earned everything." Brad looked down, his face red with shame. Stephanie was crying quietly. One of the customers, the woman who had spoken up earlier, stood up and started clapping. Then another customer joined in, and another. Soon, the entire diner was applauding. Thomas stood there, overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face. Daniel turned to him and smiled. "Come on, Dad. Let's go home." They turned and walked toward the door. As they reached it, Brad called out, "Mr. Bennett, sir, I'm so sorry. Thomas turned back, and he looked at Brad for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I hope you learn from this, because the next person you judge might be someone's hero, too." He and Daniel walked out. The door closed behind them, and they climbed back into the limousine. 3 months later, Thomas was living in a small, comfortable apartment that Daniel had helped him get. He had new clothes, a warm bed, food in the fridge. But more importantly, he had his son back. Daniel visited every weekend. They went to baseball games, cooked dinner together, caught up on lost time, and Thomas started volunteering at a homeless shelter. Because he knew what it was like. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be judged, to be dismissed. And he wanted to make sure no one else felt that way. As for Brad, he left Rosie's Diner a month later. Some say he was fired. Others say he quit out of shame. But the waitress he'd yelled at, the one Thomas had seen crying, ended up becoming the new manager. And the first thing she did was put up a sign in the window. "Everyone is welcome here. No exceptions." Because that's what respect looks like. That's what kindness looks like. And that's what the world needs more of. Thomas Bennett taught a lot of people that lesson, just by being who he was, a father, a survivor, and a man who never gave up, even when the world told him he didn't belong. Never judge someone by their appearance, because the person you turn away today might be someone's entire world. Homeless doesn't mean worthless. Poor doesn't mean powerless. And sometimes, the person you overlook is the one who sacrificed everything for love. That's a hero. And heroes deserve respect.